Father, open our eyes to see and open our hearts to receive what you have for us this morning. Move this preacher out of the way so that you can speak to your people. May we be changed by your word in seeing a picture of our Redeemer, your Son, Jesus, in whose name we pray. Amen. So we're in Ruth chapter 3, beginning in verse 1. I'm going to read through verse 13 this morning. We'll see if we'll make it all the way through chapter 3. Starting in verse 1 of Ruth. Then Naomi, Ruth's mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash and anoint yourself. Put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say, I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drank, and his heart was merry, he lied down at the end of a heap of grain, and she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning." This is God's word. So we have been going through the book of Ruth, just 4 short chapters, one of the greatest little books of literature that ever been written. It contains romance of redemption, great friendships, great loss and tragedy, great darkness and great light, great overcomers, great faith, great courage. And it's a great picture of our Lord Jesus. Throughout the book of Judges, just as a reminder, kind of set the backdrop for us this morning once again. Throughout the book of Judges, there is this constant refrain, "For there was no king in Israel." For there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes, for there was no king in Israel. There is no overall authority. There is no overall accountability. There is no overall unity within the nation itself. And everybody's doing what is right in their own eyes. The last 4 chapters of Ruth are some of the most horrible, despicable. It's maybe the most difficult 4 chapters in the Bible to read in a string, because it's just kind of a summing up of everything that has brought the people of God to this place. All the idolatry, all the betrayal of God, all the sexual sin, all the selfishness comes to a head and is kind of summarized there in those last 4 chapters in despicable actions, despicable behavior, and of course, despicable, most of all, idolatry. Everyone is doing what is right in their own eyes. It's a very, very dark picture. Very, very dark picture. And just as a reminder, because in chapter 3, as we begin this morning, what you're going to see, amongst many other things, is a pattern that's upheld in the Bible, and that is older with the younger. The older helping the younger. In Acts chapter 2, quoting from the prophet Joel, it says, the old and young shall dream together. And there is this pattern in the Bible, whether it's Moses and Joshua, it's Elijah with Elisha, it is Naomi with Ruth, it is the older helping the younger, guiding the younger looking up to the older. There's this pattern. It's generation to generation. And when you get here in Judges, what you find is the generations have failed each other. Just so that you know that this is what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches what you have all heard, and that is very simply that what one generation believes, the next generation assumes, the next generation abandons. What one generation believes, the next assumes, then the next abandons it. Or maybe positively speaking, Methodist, the founder of the Methodist Church, John Wesley, says, what one generation tolerates, the next generation embraces. Generations hand down to other generations the success, the victory that they fought for God, and the failures for compromising. And what we're seeing in our own nation right now, and what is going on in Judges that you see here, and why it's all so bad, and why it's all so dark, is that what one generation believed, it didn't take it upon itself to make sure the next generation believed it. So it was just assumed, and then the next generation just totally forgot it and abandoned it. What one generation fights, if it doesn't pass on the fight to the next generation will tolerate what the generation before it fought for. The generation after the generation that tolerates will compromise. It is imperative that we take responsibility for the generation after us to some degree. That while we are still here living and breathing and walking, and God has still given us the ability to do all that we can do, it is imperative that you do just that. That you pass on to the next generation the importance of all the fights that you fought and all the victories that you've won. So they will take it up, because the enemy is going to keep on coming. And in Judges, a long period of time of idolatry and forgetting what the generations before it fought for leads to great evil. The best place to see this is in Judges chapter 2. If you'll just turn back a few pages to the left with me just for a minute. I want to read this to you. This is Judges chapter 2, starting in verse 1. Now the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochum, and he said, I brought you up from Egypt, brought you into the land that I swore to your fathers, and I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And you shall make no covenant with other inhabitants of this land. You shall break down their altars. But instead you have not obeyed. What is this you have done? See, it's almost like God is saying, I promised to be your God, and I promised that I would keep you as my people, that I would uphold you and cover you and keep you, and now you have betrayed me with idolatrous worship, with building shrines and worshiping heathen pagan gods that don't really exist. You've fallen into all sexual sin, which is always a part of pagan worship. And it's almost like God has said, what are you doing to me? How can I keep covenant with you? I cannot bless a disobedient people. And yet, I promised to bless you. I promised to be your God. And once again, what turns the pages of the Bible is trying to figure out how God is going to resolve that. How is God ultimately going to be a blessing to the people he calls his people, and at the same time be holy and just? Either he's going to have to kill every sinner dead because his holiness, or he's going to have to just overlook sin and pretend like it's not there because he loves us. What is he going to do? Enter a Savior and a substitute and a perfect one just like us, a kinsman, you might say, who comes into the world, shares the same flesh and the same blood as we do, shares the same trials and temptations that we have, but he does it perfectly in our place so that God can punish sin and be just, and at the same time pour out his grace and love and mercy on his people. That's the answer of the Bible. That's what the story of the Bible is all about. Verse 3, now I say, I will not drive them out before you. They shall become thorns in your sides. Their God shall be a snare to you. As soon as the angel of the Lord spoke these words to all the people lifted up their voices and wept. Verses 6 through 9, Joshua dies. After Joshua dies, the last great leader in Israel, who didn't finish the conquest that God had sent him to carry out. Verse 10, and all the generation also were gathered there with their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. Where we are at the end of Judges, why is it so dark? Why is it so horrible? Why is everybody doing what is right in their own eyes? Because one generation didn't say to another generation, fight for the same things we fought for. Remember the law. Remember your deliverance. Remember the God who saved you. They forgot. They did not know the Lord. They did not know the work he had done for Israel. Okay, turn back to Ruth now. This is the background of Ruth, the darkness that you find the story of Ruth being told in. During the time of the Judges, this is what's happening in and around Judah, in and around Bethlehem, where this story takes place. A people who are doing right in their own eyes. Leaders who the leaders and judges, some of them are good, some of them are awful, some of them are a mixture, but almost none of them actually, their leadership actually spans their whole life. They fall into temptation, they fall into idolatry, they give in to women. If you're Samson, they all struggle to some degree. And even the successful leaders, there's no continuity of leadership. So who knows what the next deliverer is going to be like? There's no continuity of leadership, and the people have forgotten their God. They have forgotten the law. When you forget the law, you forget the one who delivered you. And why did God give Israel the law? Did God give the nation the law so that they could find a way to be saved by obeying the law? No. No. Remember, God saved them out of Egypt, and then he gave them the law. Right? He saved them, and then he gave them the law. So the law was never intended to be what saves you. He said, I'm giving you the law to make you a people. To make you a people. You forget the law, you forget the God who delivered you. You forget the law, you forget the nation he made with that law. So look, there's no remembering a deliverer. There's no remembering God. There's no unity in a nation, because what makes a nation, what makes it unified? The law that God gave them that is supposed to make them into a unified people. So what happens? Everyone's doing whatever they want. Everyone's doing what's best for me. Everyone's thinking about whatever it's up to be, it's for me. How can you serve me? What's the best thing for me? And if everybody is orbiting around a self-centeredness, what are they going to eventually do? Bump into each other. If everybody's orbiting around the same God, then it's going to flow and there's going to be unity. But if everybody's orbiting around a different God, which is me, myself, and I, then eventually there's going to be fights and struggle and horrible sin, horrible hatred, horrible evil done. And that's what you find leading up to Judges. The last 4 chapters of Judges, what you find is anytime anybody is faced with a challenge, they crumble. They crumble before every challenge. Every landowner, every priest, every rich man, every woman, everybody throughout Judges is failing and falling. They're not accountable. They're not responsible. They're not giving themselves to one another. This is what you find over and over again. And then all of a sudden you get to Ruth. And in Ruth, you find someone or someones who are faced with challenges. And instead of crumbling, rise to meet them. Who are given responsibilities that they never asked for. And they take them on. Who are given accountability not only for their own life and their own behavior and their own worship of God, but for the help and for the sake of others. And they accept it. And they excel courageously, trying to live for others and trying to love others. That's what you find. All of a sudden in Ruth, there's this bright light that comes into the picture. The refrain is, there's no king, there's no king, there's no king. There's still no king. Yet, something's different about this place, Bethlehem now. Maybe there is a king. Maybe there's the presence of a redeemer in the land is changing things, transforming life. But very simply recognize this before we get into chapter 3. In Ruth, there's no religion. There's no religion. There's no mention of altars or sacrifices or incense burned or priests or any kind of a religious system. There's no religiosity. There's no sacraments. There's none of those things are happening. All that's happening is there's a man named Boaz who is a picture of strength and integrity. And there's a woman named Naomi who is bitter, yes. She's a picture of Israel because Israel's original name was Jacob, which means to wrestle. What does Israel do? They wrestle with God. Here is Naomi, bitter but still believing. She is honestly wrestling with God, and she's going to persevere in faith. Boaz and Naomi, and then there's this Ruth, who is a foreigner. She's outside the covenant blessing. According to the law, she's cursed, and yet she's provided with abundant grace. She is compassionate, courageous, and humble. What I want you to see is in the presence of a Redeemer, and when people are starting to unite themselves around one another, what happens? What is it? What is the trigger? What is the motor that runs all that? People of character. Godliness. Godliness. God's not doing any miracles here. He's not. There's no miracles from heaven. There's no lightning bolts from the sky. Nobody's being raised from the dead. Sickness and disease is not being taken care of. That's not happening. There's not a few loaves of bread and a few fish turned into enough to serve 20,000 people. That has not happened here. The miracle of just friendships. Godly character. The exchange of friendship and love and faith. And I'm for you. And I've got your back. And I'll be there. That's all that's happening. And it's in that context that a Redeemer is there. It's in that context that the heir is born that will become David, that will become Jesus. And here's Ruth, this picture, this bridge that gets us from the darkness of the judges to the high point of Israel's history and the throne of David, through whom Jesus will come. So with all that as a backdrop, we're in Ruth chapter 3 now. And let's get there. So what I want you to see this morning in just 3 points here, and I'm going to try to do this more narratively. So instead of just, doing point by point, we're going to kind of go through the story. But there's some hooks to hang your thoughts on this morning. I want you to see Naomi's renewal. Naomi's renewal. I want you to see Ruth finding rest. And Boaz finds a wife. All right? So Naomi finds renewal. Ruth finds rest. And Boaz is going to find a wife. All right, so here we go. What I said just to begin with, character, kindness, faith. Kind of like faith, hope, and love. Right? Galatians 5:6. Circumcision nor uncircumcision, Jew or Gentile, does not matter. The only thing that matters, Paul says, is faith working through love. Faith working through love. So the Christian life is acts of love that are brought about because of faith. Faith working through love. Jesus said, this is how you'll know that people will know you're my disciples. You love one another. It's acts of love. Loving kindness. Kindness in the book of Ruth. Chesed. The Hebrew word chesed means kindness. Steadfast love. Kindness. That's what you're seeing here. Faith, hope, and love. In chapter 3, Naomi is being renewed. It's almost like a little resurrection. Remember, the close of chapter 1 into chapter 2, Naomi, whose name means pleasant or sweet or beauty, she says, call me Mara, which means bitter, right? Don't call me sweet, call me bitter, for the Lord has been bitter to me. The providence of God has been bitter. It's been a hard providence. And she is having a hard time maintaining faith in the hard providence of God. So, who takes up faith for Naomi in chapter 2? The last person you would expect. The Moabite does. Ruth. It's great faith, the great faith of Ruth that says to Naomi, let me go. Let me go into the fields and glean. Naomi is at a place spiritually where all she can do is just keep breathing in and out. And when that's the case, Ruth picks her up. Ruth says, I got you. Lean on me. I'll go. And she does. And then you get to chapter 3 and the overabundant grace of Boaz in giving to Ruth more than she ever thought she could ever get, more than Naomi thought she could ever get, more than she ever deserves. In chapter 3, that grace that Naomi has experienced through Ruth and her faith has brought renewal to Naomi. And now Naomi's ready to take action. This is what I want you to see. In Hebrews 11, it says faith, it is the substance of hope. Right? That's what it says. Faith is the substance of hope. Faith is the concrete reality or result of hope. And so when faith goes, hope goes. And Naomi's struggling with faith. She's lost her family. She's giving God credit. She's still believing in God as the true God. She's having a hard time figuring out how this is all going to work for her good. Obviously, which is, you would expect that. And when you are having a hard time with faith, you have a hard time with hope. Hope is forward. It's hard to take initiative when there's no hope. It's hard to have great expectations when there's no hope. Because there's no faith. Faith is in the present and forward. Hope is just forward looking. And it's dependent to some degree on faith as being the present reality of what I know will happen. When the present reality of what I know God will do or is doing for me is gone. Future hope is gone. The grace shown to Ruth, Naomi experiences that grace along with her every time she comes home with her arms full of grain. Boaz just doesn't allow her to glean from the edges of the field. He puts her right out there among the sheaves. You get the good stuff. What the other reapers are harvesting and putting into the trailer or whatever, she is putting into her own sack, taking home. That's how abundant this grace is. And this grace changes Ruth, and it changes Naomi. And so at the beginning of chapter 3, Naomi takes aggressive initiative. And it's because her hope has been renewed. I just want you to see the renewed hope that exists in Naomi at the beginning of chapter 3. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you?" Now look, at the end of chapter 1, she said, "I'm bitter and I've come back empty." Ruth is right beside her. I've come back with nothing. I'm empty. I got nothing. And Ruth is standing there. She is, what ends up when faith goes and hope goes, self-pity comes in. Self-pity lands. Right? Self-pity lands, makes a home right here on the heart. And you just think about yourself all the time, right? So I'm been treated unfair. Everybody's been cheating me. God doesn't love me. What did I do, God? Bargains with God, manipulating others starts to happen. She is consumed with herself. At the beginning of chapter 3, she says, we've got to seek rest for you. Who is she about now? She's about Ruth now. She's aggressive in pointing her to a redeemer, and she wants rest for Ruth. She has been renewed. She's back on the gospel line once again, which is not you for me, but me for you. That's where she is. She's landed. She's back where she's supposed to be. We go through seasons like that, don't we? It doesn't mean that she's not believing. Naomi is fighting for faith, fighting belief. And what helps her is having Ruth fight for her for a little while. At the very end of the book of James, it talks about the spiritual sick and coming in and laying your hands on them and praying for them. That's what it's talking about. Sometimes you're so spiritually ill and so spiritually down that you need other people to be spiritually strong for you for a little while. And that's what happens here. That's what happens here. I just want you to see it. Now, Naomi's going to pick it up herself now. She's going to stand up and she's going to get back in the fight. All right, back in the fight of faith. Believing, hoping once again, trusting. And her first action is radical, to say the least. Some people might even call it reckless to send Ruth in where she sends her. But I don't necessarily see it that way, and we'll talk about that. But here is Naomi, renewed. Do you see the renewal? Okay, do you see the renewal? If you are in the spiritual dry time, if you are on the other side of great tragedy or struggle, if you're still in the darkness to some degree, and all you can see is the light at the end of the tunnel, just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Just keep going, because you'll find hope will return. You'll experience the grace of God, and hope will return, and you'll get back. You'll get back right, and that's what Naomi's done. She's renewed. So Naomi says, look, Ruth, we got to get rest for you. Harvest, after the barley harvest is the wheat harvest. Then after the wheat harvest, who knows what? Right? I mean, Ruth's not going to be going out and seeing Boaz in the field on a daily basis anymore. Harvest will be over. How's all that going to work? I'm sure that's in her mind. At the end of chapter 2, Naomi learns that the man who's been showing great grace to Ruth is a kinsman. Boaz is actually a kinsman redeemer, a person who could redeem them. So there's great hope has returned. And so at the beginning of chapter 3, she says, it's time to take action. And so she is going to seek rest for Ruth. And that's what's happening here. So verse 2, is not Boaz our relative with the other young women that you were with? He is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. So Boaz is going to be out at the threshing floor, which is kind of a circular area, okay, kind of on hard packed ground with some walls built up around it. It kind of gets deeper towards the bottom like a saucer would. Y'all know what I'm talking about, a saucer? Y'all didn't know I knew about saucers, did you? I do. There's a little bit deeper in the end. So what happens is the oxen tread on the grain and it loosens and it separates the grain itself from the shells, right, from the stalks. And then after that, they winnow it. They actually use a fork called a tribulum, from which we get tribulation, because the threshing floor is used as a symbol as judgment, usually. Look at Matthew 3 and Luke 3. John the Baptist talks about Jesus on the threshing floor. He's winnowing. And what you do is you stick your shovel in there and you kind of throw it up. And the grain is heavier and it falls back to the ground. And the other stuff, the shell stuff, loose stuff, flies in the air away from you. So that's how they separated it. So it's a place of separation. And it's the place where at the end, Jesus will separate the true believers from not believers, the saved from the lost, the sheep from the goats, however you want to look at it, the wheat from the tares. He is the great separator. That's what he's pictured doing on the threshing floor on Judgment Day. It's also a place of separation in that it's the place where you are made worthy. You are made useful. See, it's Jesus says to Peter at the end of the Gospel of John, towards the end, he says, Satan, before the cross, before Peter denies Jesus 3 times, Jesus says, Satan wants to sift you like wheat. That's what he's talking about. He wants to win. He's going to see what you're made of, Peter. And you expect Peter to say, you told him no, right? And Jesus said, no. He desires to sift you like wheat, and when you have returned, strengthen the brethren, right? So we're going to find out what Peter's made of. What is he made of? He's a sinner, right? That's what we find out. But he repents and he comes back to Jesus, and we find out he's made of a lot more than we ever thought, more than he ever thought. That's what Jesus is talking about. So it's because the grain is sifted there, and it's everything that's waste. Everything that's not useful flies away. It's gone. And the only thing that stays is the grain. Now it's ready to be used for making bread. Right? It's used to be ready. It's ready to be consumed, to turn into food for life. So this is the threshing floor. That's what we're talking about. That's where Boaz is. And during the harvest time, Boaz would be there winnowing at night. At night, wind flows in from the sea, and you kind of put it up on a little high ground. If you've been over in the Middle East at all, at nighttime, a little bit of a breeze kicks up. It's the only time during the day it's nice at all, even close to nice. I've been in Iraq for 2 years, I'm telling you. Everybody's got things you stand up on the top of their houses because it's the only time that you can go outside and breathe, basically. So the wind comes in from the sea, kind of a little high area, put a threshing floor there, and that's where you winnow. That's where you do the separating. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. Boaz would be there with his men, protecting the grain so that thieves don't come during the middle of the night and take it while they winnow. And there's going to be a time in which they settle things down for the night. Boaz is going to lay down next to a heap of grain and go to sleep. They're going to celebrate. Why? This is the first harvest after a great famine. There has been no bread in the city of bread, Bethlehem. And now there is. So there's great celebration and great joy and there's a harvest for the first time in a long time. Naomi knows enough to know that that's where he'll be. And so she's going to send Ruth there. That's the situation. Everybody with me? Okay, that's what we're talking about here. So, she says to Ruth, listen, wash and anoint yourself and put on your cloak. Now look, some people think that this means look hot. Okay? Get a shower, put on extra lipstick, look good. Okay? Now, I don't think she wants to go to Boaz and smell bad. I don't think that's what she wants. But I don't think that that's what that means. You know, the same exact words are used after David's son, his baby, dies, and he's in a period of mourning. And after the mourning time is over, he washes and anoints himself, and he puts on new clothes. So what I think is happening here is Naomi being renewed. It says to Ruth, mourning is over. Naomi has lost her husband and both sons. Ruth has lost her husband. She's probably been wearing mourning clothes for quite some time. She probably came into Israel with mourning clothes on. She's been gleaning every day with mourning clothes on. And Naomi is saying, mourning is over. A new day has begun. There's hope. Don't you see hope? And there's an opportunity for rest for you. Now let's go get it. Let's go get it. So what some people, in asking Ruth to go to the threshing floor in the middle of the night, when there could be the possibility that other men would see her and could hurt her reputation, or Boaz might take it the wrong way. I know all those things are true, but I don't see it as reckless. I see it as great faith. Great faith. She has seen the providence of God. What she doubted, she is clear to her now. God is working for her good through this girl, through this daughter-in-law who is being a blessing for her. She has seen enough of Ruth to know her character. Ruth is courageous and loyal and committed, and she refuses to let down her mother-in-law. She refused to leave her mother-in-law by herself to go back home and die, which she most surely would have without Ruth. She has seen the hard work that Ruth puts in, day after day gleaning. She hardly takes breaks. She eats for what she can, and then she goes home and gives all the rest and all the extra to her mother-in-law. She's loving her mother-in-law. She's serving her mother-in-law. When she experiences the grace of Boaz, her response is humble, straight down, face on the floor, can't believe what she's receiving. So this is the character of Ruth by God's grace. How did the Moabite culture instill this in her? I don't know. I don't know what happened. God does that. But here she is. And you know what else? Naomi knows enough about Boaz to know his character. Ruth comes home every night and says, this is what Boaz said. Stay here. Don't go in another field. He's provided for her over and abundant what she could ever hope for. He has protected her. He has allowed her to sit at his table with his other people and have bread and wine. He has allowed her to glean, not on the edges, but in the sheaves. And he has not taken advantage. He has loved her and provided for her, and every day sent her home full, arms full. So, is it a risk? Perhaps. But Naomi knows the character of Boaz, and Naomi knows the character of Ruth. And so she says, we got to get these two together. Right? We got to get these two together. We have a chance. We have hope here. He's a redeemer. And so this is the situation. This is what she's doing. Now, if you read 100 commentaries, you'll read many that disagree with what I just gave you. But I think there's ample evidence, ample proof in the Bible that that's going on. And so, Ruth goes. And this is what she says. She says, wait till he's done for the day. Wait till he's done eating and drinking. Literally in the Hebrew it says, his heart is good to him. When it says his heart feels merry, it does not mean he's drunk. His heart has been good to him. He feels good. Of course he does. He's leader of a lot of people, and he's harvesting the fields, and it's abundant, and it's wonderful. All right? So his heart is merry. He's ate and had his fill, and now it's time to go to sleep. His heart is good to him. Take notice of where he lays down. So wait to find out where he lays down, and then once he's asleep, go and very quietly lay down at his feet. Why does she want her to lay down at his, to see where he lays? And why is she doing it at night? First of all, so it'll be private. You can't ask somebody to marry you. Well, some people like to put it up on scoreboards at games. But most of us like to do it at a private thing, right? So you can't ask somebody to marry you and redeem you while there's a party going on around you and rock music playing or whatever. So she wants it to be private. Let's wait till to some degree it can just be you and him. And this is a good place to do it. All right? And the reason she needs to see where he lays down, because the worst thing that could happen is if she goes to the wrong guy. She goes to the wrong dude, and now there's trouble. Could be trouble, right? So see where he lays down. Wait till it's all over, and then go. And then what does she do? It does not say, it does not say that she got under his covers. She's laying at his feet. This is the place of the servant. This is submission. She is laying at the end of wherever he's laying, at his feet. Not under the covers. She uncovers his feet. Why? Some people say it's a ritual of some kind. I can't find anything about that. All it is a way to wake him up. That's what it is. Isn't this kind of playful? It's kind of cool. I kind of like it. Is there some romance involved here? Yeah, kind of. Kind of some playful stuff going on. Yeah. Look, uncover his feet, because in the middle of the night, his feet are going to get cold, and he's going to wake up, and you can talk to him. Don't wake up, Boaz. Don't do that, right? Don't do that. Just lay at his feet and uncover him. So that's the plan, all right? So I want to make sure that we unravel some of those things so you understand exactly what's going on here. Everybody got warm and fuzzy? Okay, so here is Ruth. She's laying at his feet now. She said, I'll do exactly what you told me to do. So she goes down to the threshing floor. She waits till he lays down. She lays down at his feet. Now, verse 9. He wakes up, and behold, there's a woman at his feet. And he says, who are you? And she says, I am Ruth, your servant. Then she says this. Her mother-in-law didn't tell her to do this. Okay? She says, just lay at his feet and then do whatever he tells you. But guess what? Ruth is nobody's pawn. Is she doing this for her mother-in-law? Yes. But she's also doing this for herself. She wants to be married to him. Not only for the redemption of her mother-in-law and herself, but this is a man of great godliness and character. So she says, she takes the words that he said in chapter 2. Now look with me back to the back, just a chapter to the left there in chapter 2. And look at verse 12. Boaz says, for what you have done, she asked, how come you're being so good to me? He says, for what you have done, may a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. So she uses what he said in chapter 2 and says, I want you to do what you said God is doing. So this is what I want you to see, what Ruth has recognized. Ruth has recognized that Boaz sees her as somebody who has come to take refuge under the true God. First of all, out of loyalty and commitment to her own mother-in-law, she's come into his fields of grace to seek refuge under the wings of the true God. And because her faith in the true God, although a foreigner, and because of her love and commitment to her mother-in-law, he wants to give abundantly to her. So he says, I'm pouring out favor and grace upon you because your love for your mother-in-law and because you've come to this place to get under the wing of the true God. And so what Boaz is saying there is, if God, by his providence, has brought you here to put you under his wing, then I'm going to put you under my wing. Because that's what God is doing. I'm going to come alongside and I'm going to do what God is doing. So in chapter 3, she offers marriage. She's proposing marriage. She says, cover me. But she used the same words that he used in chapter 2. And what she is saying is, be the means by which God does what you said he was doing. You said God had brought me here to put me under his wing. Now you be the means. You be the way that God does that. You be the way that God covers me. This is how we all come. If you come to God, you come through a Redeemer. If you come to put yourself under the wings of God, which you have, if you've given yourself to Jesus, you do it by putting yourself in Christ. No, there's no other way to the Father but through Jesus. That's the picture. And so she is married. Look, make no doubt, Ruth is proposing marriage. Okay, she is. She is. She's not proposing small kids cover your ears sex. She's not. She's not proposing sex. She's not. The way I know that is because a couple of verses on, verse 11, he says, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. And when he says, I'll do for you all that you ask, he's talking about redeeming her, marrying her. If she was asking for something else, then that wouldn't make any sense. He knows what she's asking. They got it. They're together on it. What she wants is to be married to him. She wants to be covered by him. So let's talk about this real fast and then we'll pick up next time. Marriage in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, is a picture of being covered. It's a picture of a covering. In fact, there are still some ancient Near East rituals in marriage that are involving putting a covering on the bride during the ceremony. And listen, being covered is part of your redemption all the way from Genesis throughout. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. In Genesis chapter 3, sin enters into the world. Adam and Eve try to cover themselves with fig leaves, which can't do it. And what does God do? First sacrifice in the Bible, the first blood shed in the Bible, he kills an animal and he covers their nakedness in an animal skin. The wages of sin is death. Sin means something has to die. And he makes a sacrifice and covers their nakedness, covers their sin. Genesis chapter 3. A couple of chapters later, you have Noah's Ark. Noah's Ark is a covering for the only righteous people on earth. Noah and his 3 sons and their wives get into the ark, and God's wrath is being poured out on a horrible, despicable, sinful people. And God doesn't remove them from his wrath. He protects them in the wrath. They are covered by the ark. Exodus, the blood of the Lamb covers over the doorpost, covers you from the angel of death so you will not die. Covered. You're covered. You're covered. Ezekiel 16 is picturing God out in the desert, and a newly born bloody baby that is Israel as a young one God comes across it and picks the baby up and cleans it, and it grows, and he covers it. He enters into covenant with it, and when it gets older and beautiful, it starts to whore itself out to other nations and other gods. It's Ezekiel 16. It's everywhere. The prodigal son comes back home. The father meets him. What does he do? He covers him in a robe of righteousness. Hosea goes to get his wife, who keeps on cheating on him and having babies outside of the marriage, with names like, God says, name that child not mine. Can you imagine having a child and naming it not mine? That's what Hosea has to do. And he goes to the auction block and buys his wife out of prostitution. And what is the first thing he does? He covers her. It's a picture of being saved. It's a picture of being married. It's a picture of being entering into covenant with God. She comes and she says, cover me in your wing. Jesus says, weeps over Jerusalem and says, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, like a hen, I would have gathered you under my wing. It's protection, it's covering, it's provision. In the garden, Eve sins. Listen, Eve sins. Eve's the one who is deceived. Or my wife's going to turn off my microphone if I'm saying this. Eve is the one who's deceived. She is the one who eats the fruit. And throughout the Bible, every time it says, Adam. Through Adam comes sin. Through Adam comes sin. And you're thinking, if you're a guy, what? But there's a principle of headship, because Adam was to cover his wife. And he wasn't there to protect her that day. And she was deceived, and sin came into the world. And guess whose fault it was? Adam's. Adam's fault. You know what Adam should have done? Adam should have said, when sin came into the world and that meant death, Adam should have said to God, take me instead. That would have been covering his wife. Because that's what Jesus does for his bride. He says, take me instead. I'll take the punishment. Let them live. Right? It's a covering. And she is saying, cover me. She's saying to her Redeemer, cover me. She's laying at his feet. Naomi wants rest for her. Where is the only place that you find rest? At the Redeemer's feet. That's where rest is found. Rest. Security. There is a theme throughout the Bible of home. We're just not home. It just seems like we're not quite made for this place. And if you ever get the idea that you feel comfortable here and this feels good to you, then show up like we all did here on Tuesday and go to a funeral. And you'll be reminded that this is not home. Because we die here. We die. This can't be home because this is the place we die. You go to Mars and you open, the spaceship opens and you go out onto the face of Mars and you take a deep breath of Mars air and you'll immediately start to die. You'll immediately start to experience alienation. Because it's 0.1% oxygen and 98% carbon dioxide on Mars, and you can't breathe there. You can't breathe there. Why? Because that's not your home. That's not the place you were made for. Where is the place that you were made for? Right at the feet of the Redeemer. And on Judgment Day, when this Redeemer, this Savior, is separating true from the false, the real from the fake, those who are going to be in eternity with God and those who are going to spend eternity apart from God. When Jesus is on his threshing floor, because all authority on heaven and earth has been given to him to do that. And he is separating the world out. Where do you want to be found? Right at his feet. It's the only safe place. It's your true home. It's the only ultimate rest and security. It is what your heart is longing for. This morning, everybody in this room is seeking rest and security in something. I know you are. I know I am too. We're all seeking rest and security in something. Ultimate joy and ultimate satisfaction in something. So let me just save you the pain. It's only found at the feet of Jesus. It's the only place it's found. Because that's the place your heart was made to be. Under his refuge, covered by his grace and his blood, given for you. Married to him eternally. And nobody can take you out of his hands because nobody's strong enough. And nobody can say you don't deserve to be there because you're there because of what he has done. Based upon his record, not yours. You are safe. It's the only place you're safe. And it's the only place that you can really, truly call home. Ruth has found home there. Naomi recognized Ruth needed security. She needed more than just scraping by for herself and for Naomi. And she recognizes the Redeemer is the place for that. And so that's where Ruth goes. Humbly. Humbly. And what does the Redeemer say? He talks about how wonderful she is. How wonderful her kindness is. Everybody knows her character up to this point. She could have a lot of men. She owes Israel nothing. She's a foreigner. She is, only because of the commitment she herself has made. That's the only thing keeping her hitched to Naomi. He's not talking about kindness towards him. He's talking about kindness towards her mother-in-law. She's a worthy woman. So next week, or when we meet again, we'll talk about the bride that Boaz gets. And then we'll learn more about this Redeemer when he takes this offer of marriage and he takes it in from the darkness and he brings it into the light of the law, the city gate, the place where just decisions are made. And everything that is private is made public for the whole world to know. If you don't know this, well, let me leave you with this. Recognize this. Jesus, our Redeemer, brings everything into the light. He is light. They're in the darkness. They come into Bethlehem. Whenever there's a picture of Boaz there, light, right? It's daytime. Noonday sun is out. She comes to him in the darkness. It's private. Got it. It's special, sacred. Got it. But very first chance he gets, what does he do? Brings it into the light so all the world will know she is mine. Do you see this? This is your Redeemer. And he's going to do all things according to the law.